Welcome everybody. We have this webinar on digital opportunities for entrepreneurs. And the reason why we're doing this webinar is obviously that when you're looking at the pandemic, you're looking at the economic crisis, we can see that there are a lot of damage being done, obviously to the human lives, to the entire economic sectors. At the same time, maybe we should be also looking at some of the opportunities that nevertheless emerge from this crisis. So are there opportunities for new startup companies? Are there opportunities for sort of changing business models? And what kind of opportunities there are. I mean, I've seen there's some really interesting jokes on the Facebook and some other places that, I think there was this questionnaire type of joke asking that who is driving digital transformation in your company? And there were three answers. One was CEO, Chief Executive Officer. One was CTO, Chief Technology Officer. And the third one was COVID-19, right? So, and we all now see how COVID-19 is impacting our lives, our businesses. We here at EBS, luckily enough, we had adopted a platform called Canvas some years ago, but obviously we didn't use it to the extent for digital learning and online teaching as we do now. But at the same time, I think that this impact is really sort of kind of distributional. It's not as simple as it sounds that, yes, now we have a pandemic, we have the crisis, and now all the digital companies will do well, right? Because some of them are a little bit better positioned. Either they have a better business models, they have a business model that is more better fit for that type of crisis, or they have something that others don't have. For instance, they may have more cash, right, than others. They're not dependent on fundraising. And in that sense, I think it is very interesting sort of to discuss the, that one hand you have these sort of large platforms like Google and so on, they're flush with cash. And it seems that this crisis might create a lot of opportunities for them. Then we have also companies that seem relatively large. We are here with Petri and Ott, all based in Tallinn, Estonia. In Tallinn, we have headquarters of Bolt, right? And recently we have learned that Bolt has run into some of the difficulties. Even if it's a company that has raised money from China, from Didi, and Daimler in Germany and so on. But there is some discussion here whether the Estonian government should help Bolt with sort of 50 million euro bridge loan, right? And you have also some other examples here in Estonia where some of the companies that you would expect to benefit from COVID-19 and sort of the move to the digital world actually have problems with raising money, and instead of hiring more people, maybe are laying off people. I don't know, one company that comes to my mind is a Starship Technologies that recently announced that they're laying off some people. So those are some of the things, sort of empirical things that I have noticed recently, and it would be great if our speakers today can offer more insight to this. Again, like I'm just a professor at the Estonian Business School. You guys are actually in the front line. You're talking and working with entrepreneurs and those companies all the time. So in that sense, I'm very happy to introduce our speakers. First, we have Petri Kajander, who is a Finnish tech entrepreneur, has operated for a while in Helsinki and now is working out of Tallinn. Petri, among helping and founding the tech companies, has also founded a think tank in Finland called Libera, which for our Estonian audience, you may know it, has former Estonian president, Toomas Hendrik Ilves now in the board. Chairman of the board is Elina Lepomägi, who will join our webinar in 2 weeks from the Parliament of Finland. And also in the board, you have Björn Walrus from Finland. So we have Petri and to share his experience, and then we have Ott Jalakas. Ott is a founder and chief operating officer of Lingvist, which is Estonian language learning platform, which operates globally in Japan, Taiwan, many other places around the world. And Ott founded this platform together with his friend several years ago. He uses AI to help us in language learning. Ott can talk more about it later. And Ott has a background in finance. He has worked for SEB, which is a bank in Sweden and here in the region, quite important. And he was head of asset management of SEB in Kiev in Ukraine some time ago. So welcome everybody, welcome to this discussion. And Petri, I would first give opportunity to you to say a few words. How do you see what's your assessment of the situation? Are there sort of new opportunities that are being created? To what extent we are just reinforcing some of the business models? What are the business models that don't work in this quite new situation? Please, floor is yours.
Well, thank you. I think there are different phases to this crisis. If you go back a bit, like a month or two, we started to go to the shock phase and realize that something is happening. And this was obviously the immediate things. Everybody is scared. Do we have jobs? What's really happening here? Do we have a business in a few years or even a few days? And that was the immediate thing happening for everyone. I think now we are in a bit different phase already, at least in quite many businesses. We already been through the initial shock, and some companies didn't make it. They already filed bankruptcies. Some are, everybody's struggling. It's just a matter of the level of struggle. But Estonia was really quick to do something. There was this Estonian hackathon, which sort of kickstarted a movement, and then there was a global hack, the crisis as well, some 2 weeks ago. And I think you can use that probably as an example as well, what's happening. You see, there was, in the global one, there was 15,000 people, if I'm correct, and 500 initiatives. Some of them were already companies, and some were there basically just ideas. But you could see there, if you look, what's happening in there. Quite many of these responses, they were like immediate things. So everybody was looking, okay, what we need exactly now in this state of the crisis. So you will see a lot of repetition. Then there were some who were already thinking that, okay, what's happening in the crisis a bit ahead. But there were also a few who were thinking already the post-crisis situation. What's happening after the crisis? How is the world going to change? So I think you could probably structure these businesses in these 3 layers in a way. There are some who are just basically coping and kicking and screaming and saying that, no, I don't like this, I don't want to have this, but I need to do something. This is basically going to digital, going to the work from home. Then there are other companies who are basically shifting permanently to the different mode of working. They are doing something else. And then there are third layer of things, and I've seen this week quite a lot of this happening, which is basically not just the digital things, what are the immediate things comes to your mind, but something which is already like really cool things, probably in 5 or 10 years. And we're starting to build those things as well, but it's more complex because it's not so obvious and evident. So in that sense, I think there are a lot of things happening. We will see the results later. And now I think we just basically have to go day by day and see what's coming.
Great, thank you very much. Ott, how about your platform Lingvist. How is it doing, and what do you see? What is happening in this sort of current situation? Also, assume that you have talked with other entrepreneurs and know what kind of challenges they are facing in addition to the ones that you have.
Good afternoon, everyone, from my end as well. So my view is very much down to earth. Obviously, as Petri highlighted, the first sort of 3 weeks or first month even, it was a shock. No one really understood what's going on, and trying to take some moves, but difficult to decide whether these were rational or right ones to take. And then as a second stage, we have cut back the capacity to think analytically, and I think this crisis what we have, it's sort of has its rudeness. It's cleaning the environment. Only the strong ones will survive, or probably some of the lucky ones will survive as well. But more systematically, I think the strong ones will survive. And the strong ones are probably the ones who have liquidity in their accounts, who basically have cash. You had this example or a joke before what you asked, okay, who is actually making key decisions today? Is it like CEO, is it CTO, or is it like a COVID virus? I would say it's a sort of sales department. Today, like if you are able to sell and if you are self-sustainable, like your sales covers your costs when you are lucky. Because, for example, Lingvist, we are actually getting increasing sales. As I mentioned earlier, March was a record month for us. April will be a very good month as well. And I'm not really sure how much is it coming from the COVID situation, or how much is it our long-term systematic work of increasing the sales, but probably it's actually benefits a little bit from the COVID situation. This month, our sales in China has been extremely strong, for example. I think we will really never get to know if it's like COVID or if it's systematic work. I want to believe it's systematic work, but probably what we benefit is getting attention. Otherwise, we were fighting to get attention, like online learning resources, different online platforms, education. But now it is much easier. In a way, it's much easier to get this attention. At the same time, it's a lot of noise in the market. So a lot of different platforms from one end, real content providers from another end. So it's very, very noisy. And looking at from who will get the advantage is probably the ones who are able to do the fast moves, as Petri highlighted already, like giving an example of this Estonian hackathon as a great example of being able to move fast and get attention and get the traction. And the same applies probably from investors' point of view. I don't want to talk for investors, but I can see there are investors who are going around talking and searching for investment opportunities. And the ones who are able to execute some deals right now are probably might be quite lucky in the future.
Sure. Thank you. Can you also comment on, since you operate in very different markets, you're big in Japan in collaboration with Rakuten, and you also have Taiwan, you mentioned China. Are those markets now, in terms of the new situation, responding differently? In terms of your business, do you have like a bigger demand in some markets, and in some markets maybe less, or is it quite even and it's difficult to distinguish between those different markets?
It's slightly too early to say, but I can already see different patterns. Taiwan is doing really well. They have somehow managed to keep the current COVID-19 virus under control, so the life in Taiwan is, let's say, as normal as it can be. So also behavior of our clients is normal. Japan is in, I would say, in a little bit in panic situation maybe, because they implied really strict measures already in January and especially in February, and it seems they managed to avoid it, but now there is a second wave coming. And they don't, as I can see from our partners, we are taking really conservative approach on this one. And probably the Japanese are in general taking conservative approach on everything, but especially on this one. And in China, as I said, we have seen increasing sales coming from China. I think they are maybe feeling that the wave is already behind them and they are coming out of it. But this is only my interpretations based on the sales data that we are seeing in Lingvist. So.
And how is your competition doing? Do you have any information how the current situation is affecting your competitors, and are they affected differently, or is it sort of similar to yours?
I mean, the data I have seen confirms that educational apps in general are getting increasing sort of installs and user activities. I have seen some data on Duolingo, the largest sort of online language learning provider, at least at the Western world. Their activities have doubled. But this concerns mostly like the installs and registrations. I think the sales numbers are slightly more conservative because at least at the early days when people were not used to this new situation and crisis, the focus wasn't really at, okay, now I need to learn a new language. The focus was more like trying to find out the resources, what's there, the opportunities, and then still having the priority at the surviving. So I think the sales or the conversion to sales is slightly lagging behind.
All right, thanks. Petri, you discussed about some of the new opportunities that might emerge. So do you have any sort of concrete examples where we can see that we have straightforward new opportunities that can be sort of taken advantage of as a result of this current ongoing crisis? The things that maybe we had developed before but not sort of paid too much attention to. Or is there something sort of completely new, or are there some sort of new concrete businesses that are emerging?
I think there are different level of opportunities. One clear thing, one thing to sort of keep in mind that we are actually forming new habits now. Because we at home, we are not in our usual place of work, and we are sort of being disrupted in a sense from our routines. And this is a very good opportunity for some companies basically to introduce themselves and really make them available. Like Zoom is a good example what we're using now. And there are others for this one as well. So that's obviously something, but usually you need to be already up and running to utilize these things. But then there are other things. I think there's a new category. It's not brand new, but it's becoming like a mass market. And it's called work from home, remote work. That's completely new category in a sense, where we used to go into the office and have these meetings. Now we're doing via from our homes, from our bedrooms or wherever. And this is not going away. So everybody pretty much needs a studio. So you need all these setup cameras. You see that they already were sold out probably like a month ago. They tripled or quadrupled the prices for those which were still on stock. So these are the immediate things you can immediately start to think about. Obviously, there are also other things which are coming a bit later. VR. Today, I actually put in my Twitter, I found that somebody was doing last year actually in Tallinn, a video concept where it's called Venn room, so like a Venn diagram, but basically when two or more people are meeting each other in a virtual space, we have our cameras, you'd sort of make a mutual space between, and if that becomes a three-dimensional virtual reality, so we're going to have different ways of meeting and doing things. Then I think there are other things as well. Maybe, I don't know, should I talk them now? But I don't think the COVID is going away soon. So it may also shift things in a sense that we probably may tend not to like too dense places, like being in contained spaces for a long period of time, like being in the airplanes, probably in movie theaters, conferences, these type of things. So how do we do those things? The demand doesn't go away. We need those things. We need social interaction. We need new ways of expressing ourselves, meeting our needs. And this is something. And then there are a lot of these second order consequences as well. Well, what happens when I don't need to go to the office? I don't need a car probably that much, maybe not at all. Actually, each and every person who is doing work from home is too loud and everybody needs their own silent room. So what does that mean? Well, maybe we move outside of the town because I don't really need to pendle anywhere. So that may drop some real estate prices, may even change some city plans in a longer term, but these are sort of the things which are starting now, more or less, but they're becoming so common and we see the results in the next 5-10 years.
All right, thank you. Now I would like to actually give an opportunity to John, who is joining us from San Francisco, to talk about how would you see that from the sort of Silicon Valley point of view, that we started discussing what kind of opportunities are created by this crisis. That obviously we can see a lot of devastation, a lot of businesses suffer, sectors suffer, but if you would focus more on a sort of positive sides, what are some of the new opportunities that emerge, particularly for startup companies, technology companies, and are some of the business models sort of reinforced by the crisis, and are others, what type of business models maybe don't work so well? So what is since you have first, you have a tremendous experience. You have started several companies, being an entrepreneur in Silicon Valley, and also you have actually written a book about that called "Build Your Inner Company," how to be a successful entrepreneur. It would be very useful for us to hear what is your take on those questions. I'm sorry, you don't have a mic on. Please mute. Yeah. No. Still, you don't have it on. I cannot hear you.
So I'm dialing in through a phone.
Oh, okay. Now I can hear you.
You can hear now?
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, good.
I can see you as well. I hope others can see you as well. I can see you and I can hear you. Yeah, I hope you heard my question. I hope you heard.
Oh, yes, yeah, I got everything.
All right, awesome. Thank you.
Well, again, thanks so much for having me and for letting me hear your firsthand perspectives, which I find fascinating, for all of the panelists. The current lockdown reminds me very much of the dot-com bust of 2000 and 2001, when I was running my second company. Of course, the epidemiological circumstances were completely different back then, but the economic circumstances were very similar. That is, there was a huge downturn in the economy, the huge bubble that had built up in the internet high-tech sector during the 1990s reached a climax in 1999 and 2000, and it burst in 2000 and 2001, the dot-com bust. Maybe some of your listeners weren't even born back then. But those nights, I would get up at 2 a.m. in sweat-soaked sheets sticking to my skin. our second round of financing, our Series B round, refused to close despite a flurry of meetings with investors as we ran out of cash. Tens of thousands of companies had already gone out of business in 2000, and they were going out of business left and right all around us. Well, those nights I would get up, I would shower off the sweat, and I would try to get back to sleep. When we finally realized that our Series B round was not going to close, we huddled to figure out what to do, my management team and I. First, we cut our own salaries, and then a few weeks later, those of all of our employees by 10%. I cut my own salary by 50%. Agonizing and debating over every individual, we laid off 40% of our workforce, 40% of the company I'd spent the last 3 years of my life building. When I assembled our remaining employees to explain to them that this was the only way we could stay afloat and stay together, I felt my composure collapsing, and I broke down sobbing in front of our employees. They stood there stunned, sympathetic, and embarrassed that their CEO was crying in front of them. We took a lot of action very quickly to get through. As I mentioned, we laid off a huge percentage of our workforce. We cut salaries. We factored receivables. That is, we sold our future receivables for cash today at a significant discount, a 20% discount, not a maneuver you want to do every day by any means. We moved to smaller, more modest offices. We rented out the more attractive ground floor of our building to another startup. That startup quit paying us rent after 60 or 90 days, and then came in late one weekend night, cleared out all their belongings, disappeared without a trace. The nightmare would not end. I reduced my salary to minimum wage. Finally, we could see profitability ahead in the third quarter of 2001, and then, as you know, September 11th hit. And it took a full day just to confirm that all of our employees were still alive. So you can see how the magnitude of that crisis was similar to this one. What advice would I have for an entrepreneur today? There's no substitute for acting very quickly to protect your company from the downturn. So if you're not currently profitable, if there's a path that you can get to profitability as quickly as possible so that you can sustain yourself indefinitely, that's a good thing to do. The most profitable quarters in customer sats, this was my second company, Customer Sat. We did online customer satisfaction measurement. The most profitable quarters were the ones following the dot-com bust, because we were so lean and so mean. And so if there is so entrepreneurs have that to look forward to. If there's any dead wood in your company now's an opportunity to get rid of it. If you're a smaller venture, if you're in the earlier stages of entrepreneurship, this is a great time, I think, for a sole entrepreneur or aspiring entrepreneur to try to develop whatever it is they're working on. We don't have the day-to-day interruptions that we normally do. We can focus on whatever is important to us with relatively without interruption than normal, and it's an opportunity to make great progress on whatever your goals are. This time has been hugely productive for me. I got all the edits for the paperback version of my book you mentioned, which was mentioned earlier, Unleash Your Inner Company. It'll be coming out this summer. I got my taxes done, even though in the U.S. here we've gotten an extension. I've lost about 10 pounds. I've been busy exercising and working out, and it's been a really healthy time for me. So use this time to full advantage would be my advice to all of the entrepreneurs out there. And as Petri and others have mentioned, lots of new customer needs are arising thanks to the coronavirus, and if there is one that you're particularly well suited to address, you know something about the area, you have both expertise and passion and willingness to persevere in the area, you could be the first one to address some new opportunity that's here, like the need for connectivity with other people, or the need to facilitate work at home, or provide separation between you and your kids, or to entertain your kids while you're working, whatever it is. So those are a few thoughts, Meelis.
All right, thank you very much. Also, question about, actually getting back to you, John, and also this is question to Ott and Petri as well. Question about certain sort of risks, as you sort of discussed before. Some companies have more liquidity in the current crisis than others. We have those large, platforms, Google and so on. So lots of large platforms are flush with cash. And if I'm not mistaken, John, some of the exits you have also done has been that you have sold your companies to the Google or some other platforms. And Ott, you in Japan, you work with Rakuten, right, which is a large platform as well. And my question is that do you see any risks stemming from the fact that as a result of this crisis, those really large platforms will get bigger and smaller companies have to work in the ecosystems where those large platforms are basically sort of rule makers. We don't have this sort of nice sort of entrepreneurship, but we have more like sort of platform dependent entrepreneurship where when you're a startup company, you depend heavily on the big platforms and the rules they make. Is that something, that type of concentration, is that likely outcome of the crisis? If it is, then is it something that we should be concerned about? If it's not the case, then why do you think it's not an issue to be concerned about? Maybe I'll give first, since you have most experience, John, I will give first floor to you, and then go to Ott and then to Petri to kind of respond to this type of question. Please, John.
Well, Meelis, I do agree with your thesis that the strong will get stronger here, because a lot of their competitors won't have the resources to keep going. A lot of companies will be available very cheap because their investors won't continue investing in them. There will be fire sales, and a lot of acquisitions will be made very cheaply right now, and the companies most likely to make those acquisitions are the large, stronger companies like the platform companies that you just mentioned. And I know that if I were an entrepreneur right now, I would be striving to be one of the survivors rather than one of the companies that was acquired at this unattractive time. The time that you'd like to be acquired is when you're strong and when the market is strong, and then there's maximum value for your company. My second company, the one I was just talking about, was acquired in the first quarter of 2008. And of course, we had no way of knowing that the financial crisis would be coming just in the next 6 months. But the timing turned out to be good. But generally, we were strong at that time. And it's really hard for an entrepreneur to contemplate selling a business when things are going so well. The only reason I did is because the most experienced guy on my board, Ernie Pomerantz, who'd been a partner at Warburg Pincus for 22 years, came to me and said, John, it's been 7 years since we raised money, and you've got to provide liquidity for your investors. And either you take the company public, which we weren't really large enough or in a position to do, or you have to find an acquirer. So I somewhat reluctantly started that process, and but by the end of the process, I was really excited about it. closing the deal. And had my fingers crossed that it would close, and indeed it did. Yes, I think too, one of the things that works to the advantage of large companies that hurts new entrants are regulatory barriers. And I hope we talk about that at some point here, because we forget how much of a burden new regulations like the privacy laws in Europe are to startups. And I'd be very interested in hearing your firsthand experiences about complying with those, gentlemen, since you're all in Europe. It's not quite so onerous here yet in the U.S. But a new regulatory regime that's very easy for a well-established, deep-pocketed high-tech company to comply with is maybe an insurmountable obstacle for startups, depending upon the depth of their pockets. Incidentally, all of this, too, should be a good reminder for all of us to keep something in reserve for a rainy day, if you will. We don't hear much about that, do we? And of course, we entrepreneurs are inclined to just play it really close to the edge and spend every bit of resource that we have on whatever it is and not save anything for a rainy day. Well, it's raining right now. And those who did set something aside, a cushion, some cash reserves, are in a better position and probably very, very grateful for doing so. So those are a few thoughts, Meelis.
Right. Thanks so much. We will come back to sort of regulation and government in a little while, but I would like to give opportunity also to Ott and Petri to respond to the same question. And I think also with Ott's context, as I sort of mentioned, is very interesting because his business that they operate out of here, from Tallinn, Estonia, actually has expanded to some of the, really interesting markets like Japan, where my understanding is that you have a pretty huge concentration of big businesses, and it's probably quite challenging for outsiders to do business and to enter this market and to offer services, and you do that in collaboration with one of the large platforms there. So maybe you also want to comment a little bit on like what's your view on this sort of potential market concentration, and how does it sort of affect your business? Thank you.
Yeah, firstly, I have to agree with most what John has said on the liquidity and on focus. What I want to add here is at these times, basically, it's especially from the early stage startup point of view, it's very important to see what sort of investor list you have, because if you need external support, so the first ones to support you are your existing investors. And if your current investor list is VCs who have liquidity and who have a will to protect their portfolio companies, when you are lucky one. But if you have been maybe at the good times optimizing too much, squeezing your valuation and trying to, keep investor exposure to the minimum, trying to keep sort of founders or shareholders, like employee share the highest, when you don't get such support from your current investors and maybe the board. So it's really, really important what kind of investors do you have. And like I can see from my own company right now, but we are getting support from the existing investors. Sort of we have opened convertible note only this week, so basically supporting the liquidity and converting in the future date to equity, and that kind of measures can be taken from the existing investors. Of course, if you are lucky and strong enough, you can get from external as well, but probably not as these terms as internal ones are able to give to you. Looking at the platform play, and especially as Meelis highlighted in our exposure to Japanese market and cooperation with Rakuten, the Japanese e-commerce, now also telecom. Maybe you haven't really heard, but Rakuten challenged the SoftBank entity mobile monopoly in Japan and opened the first 5G network in Japan in April, actually, and giving really low profile on this one. Actually, it's not really in the news, although it was planned to be a big bank, so they have their own problems there as well. What I want to say, we have, it's not only at the crisis times, but we have had that sort of fight with Rakuten. How much do we integrate with them? How much do we adopt their ways of working? And how much do we keep independence? And we have had this fight for several years now, since they are investor in our cap table since late 2015. So it's what, four years now. And since they have invested, we have had these debates, discussions, fights, if you want. And I think we have found a good balance there. We have managed to keep independence, and we haven't really adopted their workflows, because their workflow is still a corporate workflow, which is too slow for us. So basically, if we are talking about 3 months plans, we are talking about 3 years plans, and you cannot really develop a fast-moving technology company by making a 3-year plans. So from that point of view, we have done our negotiations and fights on the platform integration before this very crisis, and are lucky from that point of view. We are able to leverage their platform, but we haven't really adopted their ways of working. So this is my comment.
All right, and let's move to Petri. Basically the same question. How do you see this sort of question related to the market, potential market concentration as a result of the crisis? Or is it just a short-term development? Perhaps there will be a backlash in the long term and we move to the more decentralized approach, perhaps.
I think there are a lot of different plays happening at the same time. Obviously, this will make those who have a large cash position in a better position, and they can take advantage of a lot of things. We see that locally also here, what LHV Bank was trying to do to Tallinn, for example, as an example. So that's one thing. So what John was also saying that
a lot of people don't know this example maybe here because they're from Finland and some other places. But basically, I think the example you're giving is that Tallinn asked for government bailout, and then one of the local banks said here that, hey, you don't need government bailout. We can actually help you and give you the money, right? I mean, that was the
that was
context, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it was not exactly a friendly loan. It was more like a hostile takeover in undisguised.
But anyway, that's the story. I'm just sort of spelling it out here that some of our audience is not from Estonia, and so they may not know this case. Yeah. Okay.
So that's basically the acquisition play, and some companies are not going to survive. Then there's also another things, and this is basically what's been happening the last 10-15 years when we sort of going towards the digital platforms and solutions, and we already see that they are like digital landlords. Previously, you had probably an office or retail space and you were paying rent. Nowadays, you're paying rent as well. It's Google and Facebook tax you're paying basically to get any advertising or anything, any people to find you. So these huge platforms, that's basically what's happening. Today's news, I read that Fortnite managed to escape from these huge companies for the last 18 months, but now they are giving up and they need to pay also Google 30% of their revenues in order to be in the Google Play Shop. So this is something which is not going away. Maybe some of these players get stronger, some get less dominant, and new Facebooks and Airbnbs are just emerging as we speak. But then there are also another things happening, and that's, I would say, pretense of easiness. And what I mean by that is that it looks so easy to start something online because it's digital, you don't need to build a brick and mortar things, but actually that's not the case. And there's this thing, I think, which is really huge, what John addressed, and that's the regulatory nightmare. I actually challenge everyone to start a very simple business. It's not simple. It's not actually easy, but you know, it sounds simple. Print some t-shirts and start to sell them online. And I actually encourage you to do it. Drop shipping, which is the new way to do it. Google, if you know what that means, do that in the 2 fulfillment centers, one in Europe and one in US. And then be compliant with all the taxes. You know, there's the VAT tax. You have to report to each and every country your customers are. You have sales taxes, you have tariffs, you have all these things. And then there's these digital, you know, privacy laws and all these things. Just you want to print some COVID humor t-shirt and you know, be compliant in different places of Europe digitally, globally. You could do that basically for anyone in the world. That's a barrier. That's something which is, if it is not just a regulatory barrier, it's also a learning curve. It's very easy for these big guys who has tons of lawyers, departments, processes, money to do these things. They can quickly move to the new businesses, do these things. But if you are a startup, you know, you are just me, myself, and I type of team with a dog probably, and you try to do the same things. These platforms in a way allow you to do these things, but you still are responsible and you need to comply with all the rules and regulations. And this is something which is getting worse by the year. You know, after the financial crisis that happened with the financial industry, try to open a bank account, try to get a small and medium-sized company loan. Banks don't allow that basically to happen to you because of the regulations. There are a lot of these things. Try to get a bit of funding. For example, in US, there are quite strict laws who is accredited investor, who is professional investor, who is not. Same thing happening if you want to do some crowdfunding into Europe. You know, each and every country has their local laws, and you have to comply with them. So probably the process is more like 6 to 18 months to get some equity from a crowd. So it's not just like tweeting and saying, hey guys, I have this lovely t-shirt shop. Would you like to, you know, help me with a bit of a loan or equity? So all these are things which are the pretense of easiness. So the digital low entry barrier may not actually be always that. So this is something what the big companies, digital platforms are be driving as well. And that's basically coming back to the regulatory thing, but I think Meelis will address this a bit later in this discussion.
Yeah, we can basically move to this and discuss it since John also brought it up. But so I understand your thesis is basically, Petri, that it's not just COVID-19 and it's not just the fact that the big companies have lots of cash, but in general, some of the regulatory barriers actually help big companies consolidate because it's easier for them to overcome them. They can hire all the lawyers to deal with different regulatory tax issues. And if you're a small startup and even try to do some basic thing like selling t-shirts globally, you actually have lots of challenges. You know, what would be the solution to that? Because you know, here in Europe, probably getting rid of a lot of regulatory barriers is a huge challenge. I mean, there is a huge political economy why the regulations are there. We are here in, you know, most, you know, Ott, Petri and I, we are based in Tallinn, Estonia, which is, you know, I would say still relatively liberal, classically liberal ecosystem vis-a-vis platforms. We allow ride-sharing companies to operate. We allow Airbnb. We have kind of, you know, relatively limited regulations, perhaps in comparison, maybe with some other jurisdictions. It depends again on the business area and so on. But what would be the solution here? John, do you want to jump in since you already raised this question in your previous discussion, and now Petri has sort of followed up on that. So please.
Well, a number of regulations here in the U.S. have been relaxed as a result of the virus crisis, which is a very good thing. Many of these are regulations which I think we're discovering should never have been in place in the first place. For example, many restaurants need a special permit to do takeout. Whether this is to protect the takeout restaurants or to protect the supermarkets so they don't have competition from restaurants, I'm not sure. But clearly, these laws protected somebody against from competition from regular restaurants. So we're now seeing that all restaurants, at least here in San Francisco, I'm not sure if it's all of them, but certainly many of them that don't normally do takeout are now doing it. And I guess takeaway is what you call it in Europe. And that's a good thing because it's making food and supplies more accessible to people. Doctors had been under restriction for doing telemedicine. Either they can't charge the same price per hour or per session as they do if it's a face-to-face meeting, or they're not allowed to do it at all. These regulations have been relaxed. And now a lot more doctors are starting to do telemedicine, which is a really good thing because, of course, how can you meet with the patient and expose yourself if you're the doctor or the patient to possible risk? The use of scooters on city streets has been relaxed, and of course that's facilitated delivery of food and other necessities to people's homes and offices. So that's another example. So I think this crisis is, in some sense, an opportunity to get rid of unneeded regulations. And then we'll need to work really hard after the crisis is over to make sure they don't come back. But this is an opportunity to make our economies and societies more efficient and streamlined, and also to make it easier to create new opportunities for entrepreneurs. Interestingly, one of the relaxations that has gotten the most attention is that some governments are favoring relaxing privacy laws so that they can better track people with mobile devices and tracking software that lets you see who has been in contact with each other. And then civil liberties groups have started to protest this relaxing. But I've been just a little bit amused that the one relaxation that most benefits government has seemed to have gotten the most support from government. Anyway, those are a few thoughts.
Right, thanks. Ott, in your field, are there many issues with regulations? Do you see regulations as something that creates difficulties for you in expanding your business, basically, or yeah, how would you comment on that?
So we are still at a relatively early stage, so we don't have an in-house lawyer in our company. We use several law firms both in New York and Tallinn and London, but I'm the one who is responsible for legal and compliance, and as I don't have a legal education, it means we try to avoid these matters as much as possible. Avoid is a polite way, maybe ignore is the more real way of putting it. So so yeah, ignore, avoid as much as possible, and luckily we are not in a heavily regulated sort of field as well. We have been trying to go and been trying to work with schools, and are working with some schools, especially in US, in New York, in Arizona, Phoenix, and some in Germany, which have slightly regulated areas, but somehow we have managed to keep it rather light at regulations. What I agree with John is that only the strong ones are surviving and the efficiency is the king. What I actually strongly disagree with you is that maybe it's a case in California, that government is easing the regulations, but at least here in Estonia, it seems that the government is actually using the current situation to set on some of strange regulations. One of them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, they claim these are temporary, but we will see if these are temporary or not. A good example is like one of my friends is related of managing a private exhibition house and a restaurant called Fotografiska. This is like a photography great exhibition house and have a nice restaurant and nice lobby bar downstairs, but this is fully private. So when the government ordered to close down all exhibitions because of these are private sort of public places, and this regulation and order applied also to Fotografiska. So they closed down in the same way they closed down the government-owned exhibitions. And then government installed some subsidy to subsidize the ticket revenues, but this subsidy applied only the government-owned exhibitions. It didn't really apply to this private exhibition house. So this is a great example of unfair discrimination what is happening right now. So
I absolutely agree with you. When I mentioned a few regulations that are being relaxed, I didn't by any means mean to suggest that overall regulations are being relaxed. As you so well point out, many new regulations have been put in place here. I mean, just the lockdown and of course the selective relaxation of those regulations imparts more power to government and more cronyism opportunities to get exemptions and exceptions for your business or your industry. The people are saying that the fact that the individual 50 U.S. states have an opportunity each to decide their own lockdown rules is an example of federalism. But even doing it at the state level is very crude and very coarse-grained. Look at the entire state of California being locked down. The density of people is much greater in places like San Francisco, the Bay Area, than it is, say, in remote cities or towns like Good Bluff and Redding that are hours drives away from here. Should they be subject to the same lockdown that we are here? So it's being administered very crudely and coarsely, it seems to me. You know, people are asking, what could we do to accelerate the creation of a vaccine for the virus right now? Well, how sad that we didn't have this conversation 5 years ago, because had we relaxed some of the regulatory constraints, all the clinical trials that are required, the long lead times to get new drugs approved, if we had that conversation 5 years ago, maybe we would have a vaccine for the coronavirus today. So let's start having those conversations today, and maybe by the next time a crisis like this comes along, we will be better prepared for it. I think the lowest hanging fruit that we can pick to protect ourselves from the next crisis is relaxing regulations that slow down innovation.
All right, thank you very much. Actually, if you don't mind, we will stay a little bit on this topic of role of government. You know, we talked about regulations, but I guess especially in this current crisis, we could ask the question that is it sort of relaxation or liberalization of regulations kind of sufficient for sort of supporting entrepreneurial activity? And we have actually a related question on this topic. Professor Tiit Elanurm from Estonian Business School has asked us that what would be the best way Estonian state could support such internationally scalable startups during and after the COVID-19 crisis without enforcing state capitalism or picking winners, or maybe no state support is needed. So that's his question. And obviously, it's not just a question here in Tallinn, where we have quite a good digital ecosystem with 4 unicorns. And as I mentioned in my introductory remarks, there is this issue related to one unicorn, whether government should provide them a bridge loan or not, right, of 50 million euros. But it's a more sort of general question. And I guess it also relates a little bit to this sort of market concentration question that I asked before, that I guess one view that is also presented here is that, well, if you don't do that, if you don't help those companies, then at some point, just big companies from China or from US will come and pick them, will buy them basically at discount prices or something, something in this direction. So this is sort of the debate here, a very active debate here. I assume that it might be also relevant for some other countries and cities where we talk about large digital companies and some of them run into trouble. So should we just sort of let them go bust and take it as a fact of life? Or if they are sort of critically important for the ecosystem, should be there some kind of support measures? So that was my interpretation of Professor Eleanor's question that he asked. And so who wants to be first to go? Maybe Petri, it's good for you to start, and then we can move on and everybody else can respond. Please.
Yeah, so the short answer is no. I don't think actually it's enough to do the sort of something like deregulation. I think we need something more radical. That's basically also addressed by Mark Anderson this week. It's time to build. You should check out that if you haven't read already his article. And I think what we really need is that probably what happened 100, 150 years ago in a lot of places. We need a culture of building, active culture of building and sort of tolerance for failure, tolerance and acceptance that, it's better to try and not trying is worse than failing. And this should go, I think, for all the actions, basically public services, regulation, all these things. Currently, we also are basically favoring as well incumbents. So we should be more friendly towards the newcomers in regulation, in a lot of things. We should ask, how can we make this possible? What's preventing us to doing this? What's preventing us doing this, in trying this one? So I would say that the friendliness towards small and trying is important. So this is a cultural change we need. There are also obviously other things, the structure should be more like from the government perspective, supporting these new trials, maybe a bit loose regulation in the beginning. And then when things are getting more serious and more exposed, bigger business, then you probably need to be able to, there needs to be more steps. Now it's more like a blunt tool in use in a lot of cases. Then I would say that there's also this question that, and this is basically for everyone. This is for politicians. This is for each and every nation. This is like 8 billion people. The globe is flat. Yes, that's the revelation. The guys who were saying that, the world is flat, were actually correct. Everybody is a few hundred milliseconds away now. So what does it mean to our tax base, our trade, our competencies, our competitiveness, our regulation, our public services? Everybody is a few hundred milliseconds away. And I think the last thing what I had in mind is also humility. We don't know. Let's find out together. Let's make mistakes, but learn quickly. Let's allow experimentation. How can we make this happen? Let's try attitude and risk sharing. So I think this is what is really needed. It's not just a tiny patch on the COVID situation. This is being happening for the last decades, every decade pretty much going the one direction. So we need some radical change. That's basically what is needed.
Thank you, Petri. I will go to you, John. What is your take on that?
Well, here's a thought that you never hear or see politicians or lawmakers doing that I think would be really worthwhile. And that is do a survey of entrepreneurs and ask them what are the top 10 regulatory obstacles or legal obstacles to growing your business globally that we might be able to address. From your standpoint, Mr. Entrepreneur, what are the top 10 obstacles? And then compile that list and see what are the top ones overall. And then relax or eliminate those regulations. In the U.S., at the top of my list would be worker status law. I don't know if you're familiar with this because the language is probably different in Europe, but it refers to whether an employee is an employee or a contractor. Excuse me, it refers to whether a worker is an employee or a contractor. If the worker is a contractor, as an entrepreneur, you are responsible, of course, for their fees. But if they're an employee, you're responsible for their fees or their salary, plus everything else, health care, unemployment compensation, Social Security. I could go on and on. It's much more expensive and much more of an administrative burden for the entrepreneur to deal with employees than to deal with contractors. Well, using contractors is a way for new businesses to get off the ground. If you don't have much in the way of resources early on, you haven't started selling your product or service, or you haven't raised money yet, all of the companies I've started have made heavy use of contractors early on. And then as you grow, you can gradually evolve those individuals. There's mutual agreement to do so into employees. Well, to justify that a worker is a contractor rather than an employee is really difficult. There's a 6-page form that has to be filled out for each employee or each individual to determine whether their status as a worker is employee or contractor. And in the state of California last year, we had an even more onerous regulation that went into effect called AB 5, that's Assembly Bill number 5, 2019, which basically makes use of contractors for some industries illegal. The target of this was Uber, Lyft, those kinds of companies where their workers are largely contractors. Well, I think this bill, if it's allowed to survive, will significantly impact California's reputation as a global entrepreneurship center. People haven't focused on this at all. They've focused on other aspects of the law which are not very attractive, like many of the contractors themselves don't want to be listed as employees because that limits their freedom. But I think the impact on entrepreneurship will be very significant. And you'll see a lot more entrepreneurs leaving California and going to other states like Texas, like Utah, like Nevada, like Florida, where the regulations are less stringent. So anyway, that would be my suggestion. Ask the entrepreneurs themselves what you, as a lawmaker or legislator, could do, and then try to address those obstacles.
Great, thanks, John. What is your take on this question that Pete Eleanor asked us about?
So returning to Professor Eleanor's question about whether the state support is justified or not, I think the question here is that I don't think state support by itself is justified. I'm quite radically minded in that sense, or state money is poisoned. But the problem here is that if your state doesn't support its entrepreneurs and people, then the neighboring country is. And then entrepreneurs and companies of a neighboring country are getting advantage right away and are sort of killing your home country entrepreneurship. Let's say if Finland doesn't support and Sweden does support its entrepreneurs, then Finnish entrepreneurs have a clear disadvantage there, and this is the problem. If someone provides government subsidies, government support, then sort of everyone has to do it in order to establish equal opportunities, and this is a name of the game.
At least sort of a prisoner's dilemma, basically, where everybody does the bad thing and then everybody is affected, and we end up in a sort of suboptimal outcome in that sense. The kind of technological differ that between different countries.
Exactly.
Yeah. Any reactions from other panelists, Petri or John? Do you see that as an issue, or how to overcome it, or is it possible to overcome it? Yeah. Petri.
Well, I agree. I absolutely agree with people. Entrepreneurs can vote with their feet, and the analogy between entrepreneurs moving to different states in the U.S. and between countries in Europe, I think is highly analogous. It reminds me of somewhat of the tax harmonization issue, and that is, of course, a lot of folks want the tax structure to be identical across the EU. But if we do that, and certainly there are benefits to having the uniformity there. But if we do that, we lose all the benefits of competition among the countries, and one country trying to run more efficiently so that they can keep taxes down, or can attract more companies and businesses and the industry to their country. So I'm very cautious about tax harmonization. I see it as basically creating a monopoly, and that's something to be avoided, it seems to me. So there's some real risks there.
Petri.
Yeah, I think this is hard question, and we've been seeing this already happening, for example, within US and China already some time did for that, and we're going back to the values and philosophies in a way as a nation, as a companies, in each and every level. And it's like Ott says, if Sweden is supporting and Finland or US is not supporting, well, there's always a chance that the entrepreneur could jump in there and do those things, but it's obviously not that easy as well. I think the problem usually is that government is not really good of picking winners, and that's sort of probably where the playing level field, it should be an equal playground for everyone, and so that we are not treating someone as a favorite, and probably the deregulation, allowing everyone to do things and not interfere, is wise, but politically more harder thing to do. It's more easier to give money to some people and so that you're doing something, but actually just stepping back, allowing things to happen, making it easy the things to happen. That's so hard thing to do that you probably will not win any elections, and nationalism, populism is at the rise at the moment. So I don't know. I don't have any quick fixes. Probably they would already been taken and done. But this is basically for each and everyone to look oneself and ask that, what type of person do I want to be? What type of things I believe in? What are the values? What are the choices I'm doing? Looking back 10, 15, maybe 50 years later on, how was I acting? Was I doing the right thing? Am I proud what I was doing at that time? Because this is quite an extraordinary time. How often you've been walking in the middle of a city and you don't see anyone? So this could be a once in a lifetime thing, but this have a long-term consequences, and these decisions we're making every day.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Petri. I think you already did what I was planning to do, to bring this discussion a little bit from the sort of very abstract government level policies and regulations more to the individual level. And I would like to wrap it up, and particularly as we have quite a lot of students watching us, then I think it would be important maybe to end it by emphasizing some of the key takeaways. So what is your advice to students? What is your advice to would-be entrepreneurs? I don't think that maybe all of the students listening to us want to be tech entrepreneurs, but at least some of them may want. So what would be your advice how to deal with the situations like this one, sort of tough economic crisis, what you should sort of focus on? Petri already emphasized the values and so on, but since John, you have written a book that you told us about before, maybe we can start with you and then move to Ott and then Petri. If you would like to add, you can also join in. So a few final thoughts for students and would-be entrepreneurs from you all. Please, John.
Well, the one point I would emphasize is that this, regardless of who you are, where you are, whether you aspire to entrepreneurship or not, or have other goals in life, career goals, personal goals, whatever they are, this is a great opportunity, a great time to make progress towards those goals. We don't have the usual interruptions and commitments that we usually have to these weeks and days and weeks, and use the time, this precious time, to make progress towards whatever is most important to you that perhaps you wouldn't be able to do otherwise. Whatever time management techniques would be helpful to you, making a list at the beginning of the day, prioritizing it, working on the most important things first. And that applies to any of us and all of us. If you're also an entrepreneur, again, as Petri said, look around. If you're looking for a real unsatisfied customer need that you're uniquely able to address, see what new needs have arisen as a result of the coronavirus. There are tons of them, from your own personal life. And maybe you're uniquely suited to address one of those needs. If so, go for it. Good luck to you.
Thank you very much. What final words?
I think this crisis has taken us to the future by let's say 5 to 7 years in terms of how much do we use different online software-based solutions. Working from home being a great example. If otherwise the same situation would be with us in 5 to 7 years, so now we are experiencing and having it today. In this sense, if you see, but also John mentioned that if you see a need today, which has emerged in the past 2 to 3 months, then there's quite high probability that this need will be there in 5 to 7 years time as well, because we have in a way taken the calendar year 2030, 2025, 2030 into today's reality. And if you see the need today, so most probably this need will be there in 5 years time as well. So I would say think about it first, think about it the second time. If it still makes sense, then work on it and make it happen.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ott and Petri. Any final words?
I agree what the previous panelists were saying. I would just say that be kind to yourself, be playful if you can, be curious, and start small. Just act today, start to do something. For example, I started a podcast series And within the first 24 hours, I already recorded one episode. It was just an idea. Hey, I want to talk with people. Maybe I can share something with people. Maybe I can delight someone and encourage them a bit and support them by calling and talking with them. People I haven't spoken for a while. Just do something, and you will be most likely surprised of the outcomes. Good things usually happen when you talk with people. You do things, small things. You observe things, and you also probably will learn quite quickly. So this trial and error, this is basically what the entrepreneurship is all about. Being curious, finding something, doing things and improving and just being agile and taking it from there. So good luck.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank you all. Thanks for joining. And also I'd like to thank all the people who participated and listened to our conversation. So I hope you found it useful and inspiring. And we will continue with our webinars in a week. And then we're talking about economic consequences of the COVID-19. And I will be joined by Dan Mitchell from Washington, D.C., Mark Bathgate from London, Ivan Miklas, who's a former finance minister of Slovakia, and Kaspar Oja, who's economist at the Estonian Bank of Estonia, which is a central bank here. And this is part of the Free Market Roadshow webinars. If you are more interested in our webinars, you can go to the website or send me the email, and they are open to all. So thanks again, and have a good evening here in Estonia. And John, have a good morning in California. So I hope to talk with you in the future. Take care.